Well, hello and welcome again to our reading of selections from Thucydides Book 1, the Pentaconta Itia, and we're up to chapter 93. Tuto toi tropoi hoi Athenaioi ten polynetekesan en oligo chronoi. For in this manner the Athenians etekesan, they walled in the city en oligo chrono, in a short time. So a nice simple sentence that begins this chapter. Kai dele he oikodomia eti kai nun estin hoti kata spuden egeneto. Now we get the main subject here is oikodomia, which is the building, and we have an adjective dele, clear. The sentence is literally, and it is rather the building is clear still even now that it took place with haste. So we paraphrase that slightly as it is clear even now that the building took place with haste, kataspuden. Hoiga themelioi pantoion lithon hupakentai, kai u sun ergasmenon esti he, ala hos hekaston poti prosepheron. So I'll just stop it there. For the themelioi, the foundations, hupakentai, were laid from all sorts of stones. Now we get a rather elliptic phrase here. The he here is a relative, but there's no explicit antecedent, and so we must translate something like, and there is a place where, in which. Now the genitive participle here is going with lithone, so there is a place where the stones understood are not worked together, so are not properly fitted together. But just at hose, just as poti at some time, prosepheron, they brought each one. So there are places where the stones are not fitted together properly, but are just as they brought each one. And in fact, might be nice to have a little picture here of, these are some pictures I took when I was at the Keramikos in Athens, and you can see in the picture these remains of this wall. You can see, for example, here where you've got bits and pieces shoved in, and you can see that they're not properly cut or fitted together. They've just been put in just as Thucydides said, as they came. See up here, for example, where they had to just make do as best they could. Here is another picture, slightly larger one, of the remains of the Themistoclean wall in the Keramikos. And again, you can see how the stones have just been put in these are the lower parts of the wall. The upper part would have been removed years ago. So just to get an idea of what Thucydides is here talking about. And polai stelae aposematon, and many stelae from graves, probably from tombs, from graves, so gravestones, and stones, ergasmenoi, that were worked stones, en katelegesan, were laid down among them. So this is from en plus kata, and then that leg root of lying, not the speaking root. So the worked stones were laid down among them. And you could see in that picture some of the stones were obviously worked, but amidst them were others that were clearly just put in to fit the gaps. Medzon gar ho peribolos, for the peribolos is the circuit wall, ex agthe from ex-ago, and this has the sense of to extend, and I think the x in here is taking the genitive here rather than the genitive going with peribolos. For the greater circuit wall was extended from the city pantake in all directions. So in other words, this new circuit wall was somewhat larger than the original city walls, and it also implies Thucydides knew where the original city wall was. Kaidia tuto panta homoios kinuntes a pagonto. And on account of this, they made haste, moving panta all things homoios, well, perhaps something like without distinction, all in the same way. So on account of this, they made haste, moving everything without distinction. Epesa de kai tu Piraeus, ta loipa ho Themistocles oikodomen. So Themistocles was persuaded also persuaded them oikodomain to build taloipa, the remaining parts of the Piraeus. So this is a genitive here. And then we get this parenthetical section, which the editor here has marked off with some brackets. Hup erecto, this is from huparco, but it's a impersonal use here. This is a pluperfect, so a beginning had been made on it, proteron previously, epites arches ekenu, in the magistracy, or the archonship, and now we get a haste here, which is in the genitive after the arches by attraction, which he was archon for the Athenians, cat eniauton, for 1 year. So in that archonship which he had over the Athenians for 1 year, a beginning had been made previously on this, during his rule or his archonship. The Akenu, of course, refers back to Themistocles. So in the archonship of that man. Nomisdon to tekorion kalonenai, considering the place to be kalon, to be fair, to be a beautiful place. Limenas ekon, ekon is a neuter participle here, of course, agreeing with korion. So the place having 3 natural limenas, harbours, and again I might just put a little picture here to show what's going on here. So there's Athens, and there's Piraeus, and in addition to building this circuit wall around Athens, they also build these long walls which go down to Piraeus, which will be mentioned in a moment. Here is Piraeus down here, and you can see the 3 natural harbours, this large one here, and then there's these 2 smaller ones here. And this was to replace Phaleron, which has a large harbour, but it's very open and not easy to defend. The Piraeus, he realised, was a much better choice to have as a protected harbour. These long walls, of course, get pulled down later by the Spartans after they take control of Athens at the end of the war. So, having 3 natural harbours, and now we get, after this nomisdon, we get the accusatives and infinitives. So considering the place to be fair, having 3 natural harbours, and considering them, that's the Athenians, having become nautical, having become more connected to the sea. So having done all that, propherain is to assist, and considering that it would assist greatly, this is adverbial here, with regard to the possession of, or the acquisition of power. And then parenthetically, for he first dared, so this is Themistocles again, he first dared to speak so he indeed first dared to speak of the sea, that, and then we get anthektia, which is one of these verbal adjectives, these gerundives here, and it's of course from the ant echo, to hold on to or lay hold of, so that it must be laid hold on or held onto. So he first dared, in fact, to speak of the sea as something which must be cleaved to. And immediately, this is imperfect here, he began to make preparations for the arcane, that is their empire, for their rule. Marchant, I think, translates here, and at once began to help them lay the foundation for the empire. Kai oikodomesan, and they built topakos to tekus, the thickness of the wall, te gnome ekenu, in accordance with the view of that man, of Themistocles. So they built the thickness of the wall in accordance with his opinion. The wall hoper nun, which now still is clear around the Piraeus. For duo ga hamaxai enauntiai elelais tus lithus epegon, for two chariots opposite to one another were bringing in, or used to bring in, the stones. These are the ones to build this wall with, to put between the two walls so that you could have a path to go on. Entos de uta calix uta pelos ein, and inside, between the two walls, there was neither calix, mortar, nor pelos. Pelos is clay, was normally mud, but here clay, I think. So they didn't put mortar or clay in the middle, but megaloi lithoi, great stones, sun oikodome menoi, having been worked together, so fitted together, and engonioi entome, made square, entome by cutting, and dedemenoi, bound to one another, ta exothen, on the outside, sidero with iron, and molubdoi with lead. But the height was completed. Now, malista in a numerical sense has the sense of approximately. So the height was completed approximately half of that which di and noet, or he intended. So they didn't follow his suggestions completely. They only did half the height which he had intended. For he wished by the size and thickness aphistani to defend themselves from tas ton polemion epibulas, from the, epibula is sort of plot, perhaps attacks here of the enemy, and he considered that the fulacane, the guard, of a few men, and those who were most useless, archesein, to be sufficient. So most useless in the sense of old men who couldn't fight, and those who were physically unable to fight, and they would be sufficient to defend this wall provided it was high enough and thick enough. And then for the others, so this is again after Nomisto, and he thought that the others then, es basesthai, this is future infinitive, would get on board the ships. For pros ekato, he inclined most of all to the ships. Idon, seeing hos emoidoke, as it seems to me, that the ephodon, the approach of the army of the king. Now, no article with the king, of course, as usual, when it refers to the king of Persia. So he thought that the approach of the army of the king would be poroteron, would be much more easier by sea, and then we get a genitive comparison here, than by land, and the usan goes with the ephodon. So he thought that the approach of the army of the king being easier by sea than by land. He considered the Piraeus to be more useful, again genitive comparison, than the upper city. And oftentimes he gave advice to the Athenians that if, indeed ever, they might be hard-pressed, again by land, Catabantes having gone down into it, that's Piraeus, they could stand against all comers, tais nausin, in their ships. The Athenians, therefore, thus were walled in, so thus built their walls, and they prepared the other things, so and made other preparations, euthus, immediately after the withdrawal, the anachoresis of the Medes, after the retreat of the Medes. Now that's chapter 93. Chapter 94 is quite short, so we might just do that quickly as well. So this introduces now Porzanias, the son of Cleombrotus. So during the Persian wars, Thucydides, one of the two Spartan kings, had commanded the fleet, and Leonidas had commanded the land force. Now Leonidas, of course, was killed at Thermopylae and was succeeded by his brother Cleombrotus, the guy we get mentioned here, since Leonidas' son was too young to take command. When Cleombrotus died, Leonidas' son was still too young, and the land command was taken over by his son Pausanias, who acted as regent. Thucydides returned to Sparta in 479, and Porzanias then took control of the fleet. And we have a section, quite a long bit here, on Porzanias. So Porzanias, the son of Cleombrotus, from Sparta, the general of the Greeks, Exepimphae, was sent out with 20 ships from the Peloponnesus, and the Athenians were sailing along with them with 30 ships and a multitude of the other allies. And Estratusan, they campaigned in Cyprus, and Katestrepsanto, they subdued ta pola much of it, so the greater part of it. Kai husteron, and afterwards, understand they campaigned in Byzantium. Genitive absolute, Medan ekonton, which the Medes held. Byzantium was taken by the Persians in 494-3, and so it was a natural thing after the siege of Sestos, it was a natural thing to retake Byzantium. Now this is from polyorchio with the X. Polyorchio is to besiege, but ex polyorchio is to take by siege. So they took it by siege in this, hegemonia, in this generalship. So in other words, with Porzanias in charge. And that's a little short chapter 94, and we'll start 95 in the next recording.